right, we are on page 25, starting with happy. Oh, you can't even see that. Happy. Okay. Happy for the challenge, Bill wrote a program that ran Lakeside's schedule like clockwork. An extra perk came with the job. Bill found a way to put himself into classes with lots of girls. 26, 27. In 1973, Bill graduated from Lakeside School. By now, he was on the tall side. Everyone at Lakeside knew who he was. He got ready to start college at famous Harvard University. Lakeside School had been life-changing for Bill. There he had discovered computers, he had started his first business, and earned thousands of dollars. He also met Paul Allen, a friend who became his future business partner. Before too long, the two Lakeside programmers would put their minds together to do something that had never been done before. Chapter 4, page 28. Opportunity Knox. During his first year at Harvard, Bill was busy with college classes. Then, in the middle of his sophomore year, Bill read a magazine article that changed his life. Paul Allen was working in Boston at the time. He saw the article first. These words blazed across the cover of Popular Electronics in January 1975. World's first mini computer kit. Right away, Paul rushed over to Harvard to show Bill the magazine. Bill understood why Paul was so excited. This was amazing news. People could now buy a kit to build a small computer. It could do many of the same things as a huge mainframe. Its name was the Altair 8800. 8800? I'm going to say 8800. In actuality, the Altair wasn't the world's first mini computer, but it cost less than $400. So it was the first one cheap enough for hobbyists, people who like to do things themselves. The Altair didn't look at all like computers do today, about the size of a microwave oven. It looked like a black box with switches and lights. There was no keyboard. There was no screen. 3031. Plus, you had to put the Altair together yourself. Even once the computer was assembled, buyers wouldn't have much. They would only have the hardware, the hard parts of the computer that you can touch. But there was no software to go with the Altair. Software is the language program that tells a computer what to do. Without software, a computer can't do a thing. A computer without software is like a car without gasoline. Bill and Paul were struck with a powerful idea. They would write software for this new machine. Both of them were excellent programmers. They had the energy, they had the skill, they knew they could do it. Bill called the company that made the computer. It was Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems, MITS. The company was located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Bill told the head of MITS, Ed Roberts, that he and his partner were writing language software for the Altair. Bill asked if MITS was interested in seeing it. Sure, said Roberts. He agreed to meet with the boys in a month or so. Yikes! Bill had claimed that their program was nearly done. In reality, he and Paul hadn't even started. For about the next 8 weeks, Bill and Paul worked like mad. The challenge was huge. They, 32-33, they didn't even have an Altair to work on. MITS was behind in fulfilling its orders, but the boys did have the instructions for the Altair. They could use them to build a simulator, a program that could trick a big computer into acting like a small one. In that way, they could use a mainframe computer to test out their new code. Paul set to work building the simulator. Bill took charge of designing the software. He'd think hard before writing anything. Paul saw Bill pacing and rocking for long periods before jotting on a yellow legal pad. Bill had to juggle his college classes with this new project. Something had to give. For Bill, it was sleep. Often he'd work late into the night. Paul later described Bill during that time. He'd be in the middle of a line of code when he'd gradually tilt forward until his nose touched the keyboard. After dozing an hour or two, he'd open his eyes, squint at the screen, blink twice, and resume precisely where he'd left off. 34-35. As the deadline at MITS drew near, Bill lined up another friend from Harvard to help out. Just in the nick of time, the program was ready. Paul was chosen to travel to Albuquerque and show the program to Ed Roberts. The boys had worked so hard. Now their dreams were on the line. When Paul got to Mitts, Ed Roberts brought him to a messy table. They sat at the little Altair, quiet and lifeless. Paul got ready to do a test run of their program for Ed. He felt tense as he loaded it. Their software had never been tried on a real Altair before. Would it work? Was the code right? Paul held his breath and put through the first command. Print 2 plus 2. Instantly, the computer shot back the answer 4. Success. 3637. Minutes later, Ed Roberts decided to buy the program. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had created the very first programming language for a microcomputer. Bill was only 19 years old. Chapter 5, Microsoft is born. Now that they had a deal with MITS, Bill and Paul needed a name for their business. They decided to call it Microsoft because they were writing software for microcomputers. Micro means small. In less than a year, they dropped the hyphen. Bill was president and chairman of Microsoft, and Paul was vice president. At first, the company was no more than a name. Paul took a full-time job at MITS as head 3839 of their software development. He was living in Albuquerque. Bill stayed at Harvard, yet both boys dreamed of doing more with Microsoft. So in 1975, Bill took a leave of absence, a time out, to join Paul in Albuquerque. With Paul working part-time, the boys began new projects for Microsoft. Bill's parents did not want him to drop out of college. Reluctantly, Bill went back to Harvard. But his heart and mind just weren't in school. They were back in Albuquerque in the computer business that he and Paul had started. Bill sensed that the computer world was at a major turning point. New computer chips had become available that could store lots of information on tiny wafers. Bill thought microcomputers were going to become big, really big. Here was his chance to do something important, and the moment to act was now. So he left Harvard again. This time he never went back. Bill returned to Albuquerque and threw himself into his business. Soon Paul joined him full-time. He and Paul adopted a slogan for Microsoft, a computer on every desk and in every home. That was just a wild dream in the late 1970s. It seemed an impossible goal, but the partners set about making it happen. By now, the Altair was a success. Other companies were starting to make microcomputers too. Like MITS, they only made hardware. Only one company, Apple, made both the hardware and software for its microcomputer. Microsoft was ready to make software for all the other companies. Today, we take software companies for granted, but as Steve Jobs once said, Bill started a software company before anyone knew what a software company was. 4041. In the early days of Microsoft, Bill and Paul both did a little bit of everything. But Bill's keen business sense made him Microsoft's leader. He went on the road to drum up new business. He helped manage the staff. In addition, he wrote the code for the new software. More programmers were hired at Microsoft as Microsoft grew. But Bill remained the chief one. For years, not a single line of code went out of Microsoft until Bill went over it. Often Bill worked all night and most of the day. One morning, a newly hired secretary arrived at the office and found a man lying under an office desk. She wanted to call the police. Laughing, the other employees told her that it was just Bill sleeping after an all-nighter. 4243. Bill expected people at Microsoft to work late nights and weekends like he did. Most of the employees didn't seem to mind. They were young, smart, and driven too, and they believed in microcomputers. For fun, Bill drove his fancy Porsche 911. Often he'd take coworkers out in the middle of the night for fast rides on the desert roads outside town. In 1979, Bill and Paul decided to move their company. 4445. The desert city of Albuquerque was out of the way for clients. Plus, Bill and Paul wanted to be in green country again, close to family and friends. So, Microsoft moved to Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. Before leaving Albuquerque, the small Microsoft staff posed for a picture. 11 out of 13 original employees were in the shot. 4647. There was hope and determination in their young faces. Maybe they were looking to their own bright future. Chapter 6, A Big Deal. Bill had always had a nose for business. When he was 10, Bill couldn't afford to buy an expensive new baseball glove, so he paid his sister Christy $5 to use her baseball glove whenever he needed it. To seal the deal, Bill wrote a contract and made his sister sign it. In 1980, Bill got ready to sign a major contract with IBM. It would make Microsoft a much more powerful company. 28-29. IBM was then the world's biggest maker of computers, huge mainframe computers. Now, they wanted to get into the small computer business too, so they went to Microsoft. What an opportunity! Bill was 24 years old at the time, and 32 people were working at Microsoft. In contrast, giant IBM employees employed well over 300,000 people. At first glance, Bill looked too young to be taken seriously by businessmen at IBM. However, they soon saw how much he knew about computers. IBM decided to hire little Microsoft to develop the language and operating system for its new personal computers. An operating system is the most important software on a computer. It runs the keyboard, the monitor, and all other software programs. A computer without an operating system is like a car, all gassed up and ready to go, but without a driver. For nearly a year, Microsoft worked to create the software for IBM, and in 1981, IBM was ready to roll out its first microcomputer. It was called a personal computer, PC for short. Each and every PC was run by MS-DOS. MIS stood for Microsoft, D stood for disk, and OS stood for operating systems. Sales skyrocketed. Soon, other hardware companies were making clones of IBM's personal computer. A clone is a copy. That meant that Microsoft could sell versions of MS-DOS to all these companies too. Before long, MS-DOS became the standard operating system for computer users around the world. All these users could share files. There was now a global language and it lived inside computers. As a result, growth at Microsoft was explosive. By the end of 1981, the company had 130 employees. By 1983, there was nearly 500. Bill no longer knew everyone by name. Still, he stayed right in the middle of the action. He was a very hands-on boss. At meetings with Bill, programmers had to be prepared. Bill's brain was something like a hard drive. It stored a huge amount of information about both computer programs and the business world. In addition, Bill could see the big picture. He caught on very quickly to other people's ideas. If there were holes in the plan, Bill saw those too. Sometimes he'd shout at a programmer, "That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." 52-53. New workers were sometimes taken aback by Bill. Paul later wrote that Bill, with his intellect and foot tapping and body rocking, came on like a force of nature. Yet Paul saw that Bill respected programmers who stood up to him and defended their ideas. What mattered to Bill was finding the best answer to problems. If he challenged new ideas, it was to make sure all the details had been carefully thought out. If so, Bill would end the meeting, no matter how much he had shouted, by quietly saying, "Okay." Workers who stayed at Microsoft came to understand and appreciate the big boss. The company's success spoke for itself. Clearly, Bill knew what he was doing. Employees were glad to be at a cutting-edge company. And besides, Bill had a sense of humor and fun. He set up summer picnics where teams of Microsoft employees competed in contests and games. It was just like the Cheerio Olympics of Bill's youth. The company was losing a very important person, though. In 1982, Paul Allen found out. We've got a picture page. These are probably the Cheerio Olympics, or the games that resembled the Cheerio Olympics. Paul Allen found out that he had Hodgkin's disease. We're on page 56. This is a kind of cancer that very often can be cured. Paul had been feeling a lot of pressure at work. Fighting over ideas was fun for Bill, but for Paul, fights were stressful. When he was healthy again in 1983, he decided to leave Microsoft.